Imagine yourself back in the late 50s, right after the Civil War, and you're not allowed to sit where you are now due to the color of your skin. How does that make you feel? Would you let something like this happen to you? Today we will be talking to you about Martin Luther King, one of the best public speakers of all time. We'll talk about how his use and demonstration of communication concepts relate to our class by first talking to you about the techniques he used to get the audience attention and relate to them. Secondly, how he used certain words that made a big impact in his speech. And lastly, about Martin Luther King's ability to speak and how he inspired us for our public speaking future. One of the reasons we chose this speaker is because his speech, "I Have a Dream," is one of the most monumental speeches in history. It sends out strong messages that help shape society, and his style and approach to oral presentations is one we hope to emulate. His speech was persuasive to most people because it helped open their eyes to the racism in the United States by describing a lot of different things that were happening during that time. It was also interesting because it helped change current times. And now Melissa will tell you a little bit about how the audience can relate to the speech in general.
When someone's giving a speech, people tend to listen just because it's the more polite thing to do. But when people actually understand you and realize what you're talking about is something completely different. According to our very own teacher, Mr. Hassan, what you need to do is talk about what you know. And that's what Martin Luther King did. He knew what his audience was going through because he was living it. That made him credible. That made his topic relatable, not only locally, but nationally. The reason why people listened to him was not because he was well-liked or anything, but because of how he talked to the audience. He repeatedly used words such as family. He repeatedly used words such as friends. Like all the speeches we've done this semester, we had to have an attention getter, and that's what he did. His attention getter was equality, but not for himself, but for everybody. And that's what people wanted to hear. That's what they liked. They wanted equality for everybody, so they paid attention to him. Now, Ale will be talking to you about other techniques and words he used to impact the speech to his audience.
Okay. Martin Luther King was a very good speaker, and he had a lot of ways that impacted the audience. According to our own textbook, The Survival Guide to Public Speaking by Edwin Allen Reed, he speaks about how we have to think about our audience in order to effectively persuade them or affect them. And some of the main things that he says that we have to think of, that we did think of while we were making our speeches, are characteristics that all audience have, like they don't know, they're lazy, they would like to be entertained, and or we don't care. And ways that Martin Luther King focused on those things is that by saying we don't know, basically what Reed was saying in the public speaking guide is that we have to use simple words that every audience member will understand, and that's what Martin Luther King did. If you actually hear the speech or if you read through it, it's a very easy speech for everybody to understand. We're lazy, according to Alan Reed, is basically that we remember only about half of what we hear. That's why I think that Martin Luther King used words, repeated a lot of words like "I have a dream." That certain part of the speech was "we all know," so a lot of people can memorize or remember that was one of his main points. And we don't care, according to Alan Reed, is that we basically just care about things that affect us. So a good way that Martin Luther King affected everybody is that he used words like "we," "us," "together." He was able to relate everybody by saying all of God's children, so we all seem like one group. And that's also something we did in class, because the topics that we chose for our speeches were like environmental things that relates to everybody, or student budget cuts and stuff like that, which relates to all of us. So he did a good way to relate things, and we also had to do that in our class. And lastly, that we like to be entertained. We don't like to hear things that are boring. So like in Martin Luther King's speech, he used an analogy. He relates freedom as a check. He says that in a sense we're here in our nation's capital to cash a check. He also mentions that it's like insufficient funds, that's why they weren't really getting the freedom. And when he said that, it was like a check. A lot of people laughed in the audience and everything, so it was more entertaining than just keeping it boring. So now that I have talked to you about some words and things that Martin Luther King, Daniel will talk to you about the ability of Martin Luther King to speak and some things that inspired us about him.
No, just think about the ability that this man had to actually go up in front of, thousands of people in the nation's capital, and for it to be recorded and such, and for him in the times that he was in, racial explosion. There's a lot of civil rights activists. You had Malcolm X on the other hand talking about different things, and you had Martin Luther King in the civil rights era talking about what he was talking about. Now the ability to go up there and do that is difficult. Now we can come up here in front of 14 people in the class. Sometimes we have less than that, and it seems so hard. We're up here shaking, we're nervous. This man was up there and he was just strong. His words had poise. Had a lot of poise to them. He didn't go up there and he wasn't just talking about simple husband and wife problems. He was talking about world problems, a problem that's been facing us since the beginning of time. And he was rooting it to America, which he lived in, which we are at now. And he was looking at the contradictions inside of that. The ability to go up there and to, what she was talking about, the enthusiasm to be able to use attention getters. These are just things that we learned today and we kind of studied. But for him, it seemed very naturalistic. He uses very strong words and he wrote this stuff. It's very poetic. It's not like he went up there and he's saying that I have a dream to change the world and thus and thus and thus. But he said it and expressed it in such a way that it was performed very correct. And then the way it was written, if you just look at the words, the written words, if I had to read through it, I say today, my friends, that in spite of difficulties and frustrations of the moment, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. So he's tying different things in it. He wants to bring examples to you. So the ability that we can study from this is the enthusiasm what we're talking about, to have great pride and strength in what we're talking about. We just don't go up there and pick any topic and choose it and just discuss it because it's a speech. We do it because we really want to. And to have the ability to speak clear, strong, he could project without a microphone, and to be able to do it in front of one person or thousands of people and have it have the same strength to it. So Carlos is going to summarize our speech on Martin Luther King.